I've been in a reading slump for over a year now. In 2024, I read 3 books, 2 of which were graphic novels, and one was an audiobook. So this year, I'm challenging myself to read at least 20 books. So I thought, what better way to hold myself accountable than to make a video about my TBR list and upload it to the internet for anyone to see. Now, allow me to introduce you to my shelf of shame. This is where I put all the books that I've owned for a while and I just never get to read them. What I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna try to read as many of them as I can. I'm not gonna buy any new books, and I am gonna categorize them on a hypothetical shelf, and I'm gonna rank them by which are the must read for me this year, then which ones I am excited for, but they're not necessarily a priority, and finally, which ones I may or may not get to. I don't want this video to be extremely long, so I'm gonna be as brief as I can to explain why I'm excited to read these books or why I bought them in the first place. The first book in the list is gonna be 1984 by George Orwell. This book is present in so many conversations nowadays that I feel like it's about time for me to read it. It's definitely a priority. Also, I'm planning on doing a separate video about this book, but I still have to see how that's gonna go. The second book is gonna be Best Served Cold by Joe Abercrombie. I read the first Law trilogy about 2 years ago, I would say, and I absolutely loved it, but I took a really long break after that, so I think it's about time for me to continue. I like the fact that it's a standalone novel. I know it's part of a bigger trilogy, but still, this is definitely a priority for me. Next in the list is going to be Witches Abroad by Terry Pratchett. I read Small Gods, and that's the only installment I've read in the Discworld series. I really like how deep the themes can be, while at the same time he treats it in such a funny way. So it's definitely a series I want to come back to. It's not necessarily a priority, but I am still excited to read this. Okay, this is a big one. Next up is The Faithful and the Fallen series by John Wynne. I've heard nothing but good things about these books. It's basically a classic fantasy story, but it's also unique in its own way. Beyond that, I don't really know anything about it. However, with all the books that I still have on this shelf, I don't know if I just want to jump into such a big series right now. So I'm going to put it on the maybe for now, and hopefully I can get at least to the first one. Now I have Pawn's Gambit by Rob J. Hayes. What I know about this book is that it's a tournament story where there's multiple gods and they choose a champion. This book has been sitting on my shelf for a really long time. It's probably one of the oldest ones that I have. So I want to get to it, but I don't know if it's a priority. So I'll just put it on maybe for now. All right. Now I have Kings of the Wild by Nicholas Ames. This is a getting the band together kind of story, which I haven't really read a lot like that. What I've heard from this book is that its humor either really works for you or it just completely doesn't. I tend to be on the very lenient side when it comes to humor. It's really easy for me to find something funny, so I expect to like it. So this one I would put on excited. Oh god. So now I got this massive book, which is Vagabond by Takehiko Inoue. I am not a huge manga reader, but I know that this book is based on Musashi's life. This is a beautiful edition, so I just had to buy it. Even though right now it's on an indefinite hiatus, I've heard that it's still worth reading. However, I think as of now, there's only one volume of this particular edition that I bought. I think they're going to be releasing them every 3 months or so. I don't want to commit too hard on it because if I really like it, I'm going to want to keep reading it. I would rather wait for all of them to be out. But maybe I'll take the dive if I get too impatient. So for now, I'll put it on the maybe. Next, I have Hyperion by Dan Simmons. I wanted to read this book for the longest time, but to be honest, I am a little bit intimidated by it. I know it's about different groups of people that travel to a new planet, and all of them have a different reason to be there. So it explores different themes. The plot itself just really captures me. But I think the reason why I have kept away from this book is because I am a little bit scared that I'll be disappointed or that I'm not gonna like it. I've decided that this year is probably the best time for me to just get into it. I am really intrigued by it. So this is a priority for me. Next up is A Canticle for Leibowitz by Walter M. Miller Jr. My brother recommended this book to me many, many years ago. I don't even remember how long it's been. To him, I think this book was a revelation. It was life changing for him. He would not stop talking about it. I know it's about some sort of nuclear war that happened, and it's about a group of people that are trying to rebuild civilization. From what he told me, it gets very philosophical and it goes very deep into very heavy themes. I don't want to know anything else about it. I just want to dive into it and see what it is that he liked so much. So, this is also a priority for me. Next, we have The Left Hand of Darkness by Ursula K. Le Guin. The more I read from her, the more that I like her writing because she always approaches these very intricate moral dilemmas from the wildest, most opposite points of view. And her characters always seem very realistic. And I expect this one to be no exception. It's about this human ambassador that travels to some alien planet where every inhabitant is gender fluid. So they have to come to terms with that despite their conflicting views. So I have really high expectations for this one. I would say I'm very excited. So I have now a bunch of nonfiction. Next is Marcus Aurelius, The Stoic Emperor by Donald J. Robertson. Learning about Stoicism was definitely my gateway into philosophy. It's something I've always been very interested in. And then finding out that there was a Roman emperor that not only practiced it, but also wrote a whole diary with his thoughts and his lessons. It's just mind blowing to me. I want to look from an outside perspective into his life, since the only exposure I've had to it has been from his own meditations. And once I read this book, I want to go back and revisit his meditations so that I can compare and have more perspective into who he was. Next is The Storm Before the Storm by Mike Duncan. The History of Rome is one of my all time favorite podcasts, and one of my favorite history periods to learn about is the fall of the Roman Republic. So, the guy from the History of Rome podcast writing a book deep diving into the fall of the Roman Republic is just perfect for me. I don't know if I'm going to get to this one, so it's going to be a maybe. I expect to really like it. Okay, now I have Malintin's Choices by Camilla Townsend. This book was really interesting to me because it talks about the Spanish conquest of Mexico, but rather than looking at it from the perspective of the Spanish or from the perspective of the Mexica who were being conquered, it tries looking at it from the perspective of the woman that was translating between both cultures. I would say she's probably one of the most controversial figures in Mexican history because, on one side, some people look at her like a traitor, and on the other side, people look at her like a victim. But I think this book is trying to reconcile both of those and just see her as the human that she was and just a person like all of us trying to do the best with the situation that she got. This is a priority for me. Next, I have another book by Camilla Townsend called The Fifth Son, and it's also talking about the history of the Mexica from the perspective of the Mexica. Most of the history that we know was written directly from the Spanish that conquered them, from their point of view and from their perspective. When the Nahuas were forced to learn the Latin alphabet so that they could read the Bible, they started writing their own history using that alphabet. So now we have all these sources where they tell their own story through their own perspective. This book is trying to condense that history into a single text. It's something I'm really excited about, but I don't know if I'm going to want to get into it immediately after reading the other book about the Aztecs by the same authors. I'm just going to leave it at excited for now. This book is probably one of the oldest one in my collection. I've had it for as long as I've had this bookshelf, at least. What this one is about a Spanish priest that is sent by the King Charles V to Mexico so that he can document the lives of the surviving Mexica after the Spanish conquest of Mexico. So he basically finds this really old person and chronicles his entire life. I started it at one point, but it's just massive. It also has like tiny letters. I think it's actually as thick as a Stormlight. archive book, it's the same if not longer. Yeah, it's just intimidating, like the sheer size of this thing. But if I'm doing a challenge like this, I think this is the perfect time to finally overcome that intimidation of the book's length and enjoy the process. I'm going to rank it as a priority. Next, I have a little project. This one is The Wizard of Oz, but the Tokipona edition. Tokipona is a constructed language designed by a Canadian linguist called Sonia Lang. She did it as a challenge to see how simple a language could be and to try to make herself think in the simplest way down to the most basic aspects. So it's a language that you can learn within an hour, but it takes a lot of practice to be able to express yourself effectively using this very condensed vocabulary. It is something I want to look more into, and then I want to challenge myself into being able to read this book. It even has its own writing system. I'm going to say this one I'm excited about. If it takes me more time than this year, then I'm not going to be mad about it. Next is Jade City by Fonda Lee. What I know about this book is that it's supposed to be an intergenerational epic story about feuding crime families, sort of like The Godfather. It is also set in an Asian setting, and apparently it also includes martial arts and it also integrates fantasy aspects into it. So it's something that to me sounds like I would really enjoy. So out of all the series that I want to read, I think this is near the top, so I'm going to put it as a priority. Next is Be Water, My Friend by Shannon Lee. I am a big martial arts nerd. I love kung fu movies. The fact that Bruce Lee's own daughter wrote down his lessons and his philosophy into a book is something I'm very interested in. Fonda Lee and Shannon Lee collaborated into a book that came out this year, which is also based on both the teachings shown in this book and it integrates fantasy elements like Jade City. So I definitely want to go through both these books before I get to that one. So that's even extra motivation. So this also is a priority. Next one is the Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu. And I picked the translation by Ursula K. Le Guin again. This is the core text for Taoism, which is a religion and a way of life that I'm fascinated by. I've always been very curious about it, so I want to learn more. And what better way to do it than by reading this? The reason why I picked this particular translation is because from what I saw as I was looking for it, there are some that translate directly from the Chinese text. So it doesn't seem to translate very well into English. So it just comes out as very confusing, apparently. Then there are others that reinterpret the text and just tell you plainly what it's trying to tell you. At least from the little section that I read from this book, it looks like Ursula K. Le Guin combines those two things and makes it into a way that's accessible to English speakers, but at the same time tries to preserve the literary aspect and the poetic aspect of the text. I'm excited about this one, so I'm just gonna leave it there. Now I have Neverwhere. I bought this book back in 2021 after I read The Ocean at the End of the Avenue and Coraline. I just really liked this author's way of telling stories. And I just wanted to read more. So now with the recent news that came out, I am very conflicted on whether I still want to read this or if I should leave it for later. So now I think it's appropriately sitting in my shelf of shame. So for now, it's just going to stay at maybe. Now I have Origin by Dan Brown. I don't really know exactly what the plot of this book is. I've read two of his Robert Langdon novels, The Da Vinci Code and Inferno. I think they get too much hate. I think they're just really entertaining. It's like watching an Indiana Jones movie or National Treasure. I like the way he describes real places that you can actually go and see and all the details he includes. And then if you're into conspiracy theories, as ridiculous as they may be, it's still really fun to see how he interconnects all these things. To me, it kind of feels like I'm taking a tour through whatever city the story is set in. I don't know if I'm going to get to this book. I'm going to put it as a maybe. Now we have A Memory Called Empire by Arkady Martin. All I know about this book is that it's a sci-fi with an murder mystery, political intrigue, and it's based on Mesoamerican culture. I'm already sold on this book just by that. However, this is one of my latest additions into my shelf, so I feel the need to push it down a little bit, but I'm still really excited for it. And lastly, I have Uzumaki by Junji Ito. So this is another thick manga book. The one thing that made me want to read this is that I am a huge horror fan. So if I'm gonna get into manga, I think this is a good starting point for it. For now, it's gonna be a maybe. Those are all the books I have. I think it's a pretty big list considering I'm not a really fast reader and I haven't been reading in a while. I think it was really helpful for me to go through all these books one by one and talk about them and what made me excited about them to get in the mindset of wanting to read them. I think this is a good starting point to get back into reading. At the end of the year, I'm probably gonna come back and rewatch this video and see the expectations I had and compare them to my actual opinions. I think that's gonna be interesting, and also I'm gonna see if I actually ended up reading the books that I expected to read or if I just ended up jumping to a different one. Anyways, I think this was a good first video for me, so I would appreciate any feedback if you have any, and thank you for the attention.